Hey there, how's it going? As I explained in my last video, my little avatar here is wearing a witch's hat in December because lack of time to edit in October means you're getting the rest of my Drawlloween videos in December, and we're just gonna roll with it. Today you're seeing my drawing of a vampire for day 7 of Drawlloween, and I thought it might be fun to also talk a bit about some interesting history on vampires. Be sure to stick around until the end to see the finished drawing and today's featured artist. Let's get into it. I'm sure many of you already know what a vampire is. An undead person who preys on the living at night to drink their blood. They burn up in sunlight, they're afraid of crosses and garlic, and their reflections can't be seen in mirrors. About sums it up, right? But where did this concept for vampires come from? How vampires are portrayed today is largely influenced by Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm sure many of you have either read the book or have at least seen movies inspired by it. It's widely considered the standard for our portrayals of vampires today, despite the fact that Stoker's book actually didn't include death by sunlight. Nosferatu, an adaptation of Stoker's Dracula which appeared 25 years later, did however include the death by sunlight trope. But still, where did the whole concept that vampires were blood-sucking creatures who had to fear the sunlight come from? What led to the myth? Well, it's possible that this myth could have originated from a medical source. Have you ever heard of porphyria? Porphyria is a rare blood disorder that causes the body to produce less heme. Heme is a critical component of a protein found in red blood cells called hemoglobin that carries oxygen from the lungs to the rest of the tissues in your body. It's a hereditary disorder, meaning you can only get it if you inherit one of the mutated genes that causes porphyria from one or both of your parents, depending on the type of porphyria. It's also sometimes referred to as the vampire disease. More on that in a bit. There are 8 types of porphyria that all differ from each other, but the one thing that they all have in common is that they cause the body to accumulate porphyrins or porphyrin precursors. While these are normal to find in the body, they don't typically accumulate, and when they do, it can cause many different symptoms depending on the type of porphyria the person has. And it's believed that these symptoms could be what led to the vampire myth, which I'll get to shortly. This disorder was also quite prevalent among the royalty and nobility in Eastern Europe a few hundred years ago. Why was it so common among the royals if the disease is supposed to be rare, you ask? Remember when I said it was hereditary? Yeah, 2 words, royal inbreeding. Most royals and nobility like to keep it in the family, so to speak, meaning they would marry their cousins to retain power, believing if they kept the bloodlines pure, they could strengthen the line of succession. So, if one person is carrying a trait for porphyria, and they marry their cousin who also carries the trait because they both share a bloodline, then their children will be born with porphyria. And it was anything but a fun ride for those born with the condition. That said, let's get into the symptoms of porphyria and why it's sometimes referred to as the vampire disease. The most common symptom is hypersensitivity of the skin to sunlight. Exposure can leave those affected with blistering and lesions, and sometimes facial disfigurement. Normally, I tend to include reference photos of what I'm talking about with these types of videos, but in this case I will not. The results of repeated porphyria attacks can be graphic, for lack of a better word. In addition to facial disfigurement, repeated porphyria attacks, which are associated with pain, mental disturbance, and vomiting, can cause the gums to recede. This, combined with a tendency for teeth in some porphyria patients to grow in deformed and pointed, you can see why some might have mistaken them for fangs. Porphyria also causes those affected to have dark red urine, which made some doctors at the time believe that they were excreting blood, when in reality it was the presence of excess porphyrins that made their urine dark. Some doctors, who realized that the disorder came from issues within the patient's blood itself, even recommended that porphyria patients drink blood to compensate for the defect in their own blood. But this was animal blood, not human blood. You may be wondering, and yes, aversion to garlic was a thing too. Garlic contains sulfur, and sulfur can bring on an attack of porphyria, which again causes a person afflicted with the condition a lot of pain. So, understandably, they avoided garlic like the plague. What about vampires being unable to see their reflection? Yes, this actually has some basis in fact as well. Now, people with porphyria could see themselves in mirrors just fine, assuming their vision was still decent. However, the poor oxygenation caused by porphyria can lead to the destruction of facial features and collapse of facial structures like the nose. This disfigurement, combined with the lesions, could understandably result in the patient wishing to avoid mirrors. But surely being afraid of crosses was made up, right? I wouldn't be so sure about that. But to be fair, it was more of a fear of those carrying the crosses, rather than fear of the actual crosses themselves. During the Spanish Inquisition that took place from 1478 to 1834, around 600 vampires were burned at the stake. It's believed that some of these supposed vampires were really just innocent people suffering from porphyria. A person with porphyria during this time would have had good reason for fearing the Christian faith and its symbols, because there was a good chance you'd be mistaken for an evil monster by those wearing these symbols, and they might kill you for it. Luckily, today there is much more understanding about this condition. But to sum up, it's believed that porphyria patients, who could only go out after dark, sometimes drank blood to relieve their symptoms, avoided garlic mirrors and crosses, and sometimes appeared to have fangs, could have been what led to folk tales about vampires in Europe. Did Bram Stoker know about this condition and its ties to vampire folklore? Perhaps, perhaps not. By this time, there was increasing knowledge of the disease, and H. Gunther's book that classified the different types of porphyria had been published just 8 years before Stoker published Dracula. However, I believe it's more likely that these symptoms had already been entwined with the myth of vampires for so long that Stoker's book only further cemented them in the folklore, rather than Stoker actually having made a conscious effort to link the disease to the myth, assuming he even knew about the disease at all. So, this is where the myth of vampires known to much of the Western world likely came from. However, there are many differing versions of vampires from various different cultures, such as the Penanggalan from Malaysia, the Apylk from Russia, or the Brahma Purusha from India, to name a few. And they don't all subscribe to the portrayal of vampires like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, and many are far older. So it makes you continue to wonder, where did the notion of a blood-sucking monster come from? Why is it a creature so widely known in folklore throughout the world? That, friends, is a question for another day. Right now, my drawing is finished, so it's time to wrap up this video. This drawing took me about 5 hours to complete. I hope you like it. Before I go, it's time to feature some art. Check out this piece by artist Aquavarin on DeviantArt. If you want to see more of their work, then check out their links in the description. Also, if you want a chance for your work to be featured in a future video, I'm currently accepting submissions over on DeviantArt. All my links are down below. That's all for today. If you want to see more of my Drawlloween drawings, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Or if you're not ready to commit just yet, maybe check out the playlist on the top from last year's Drawlloween, or the playlist on the bottom for this year's Drawlloween art. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!